Welcome to Changing Minds with You. This webinar is about self-compassion, what it is, where it comes from, and how we can practice it on our daily lives. Before we begin, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Camilla, and I am one of your facilitators here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this concept because we may be familiar with things such as empathy, self-care, and mindfulness. We may not know that these are components of self-compassion. And I want us to learn what it is, how to practice it, and how important it is to our mental health. So I'm excited to talk to you about this concept and for you guys to learn more about it. And I hope you learn something new at the end of this webinar.
Hello, and my name is Winnie. I will be Camilla's co-facilitator today, and I too am equally excited to delve into self-compassion as we talk about what self-compassion is, and for us to learn new ways, new practices, new strategies to ensure that we are practicing compassion unto ourselves and our daily lives.
Right, so here are some of the learning objectives we will be looking at. We are first going to define compassion and identify some examples of compassion, and then complete an activity about compassion to fully get a grasp of what it is. We are then going to explore the difference between compassion and empathy and learn more about empathy and how to practice it on our daily lives through an activity. Then we will begin discussing self-compassion and the three pillars of self-compassion, as well as discuss the benefits of practicing self-compassion and learn where our lack of self-compassion comes from. Lastly, we are going to analyze the difference between fears versus tender self-compassion and give you some strategies to practice self-compassion on your daily lives. To wrap it up, we are going to discuss self-care and explore some self-care tips as well that you can integrate into your routine. And it may seem like a lot of information, but that is okay. We are trying to give you a good understanding of what each of these concepts are. If you don't understand all of them, do not worry. Learning what compassion is, empathy, and self-compassion takes time, and nobody will be pressuring to learn everything by the end of the webinar. We just want you to take 1 to 2 things that you can put into your daily life. Before we start discussing what compassion is, I want to show you a short video that discusses what compassion is and gives some examples of compassion. So go ahead.
Compassion means being aware of others' needs and acting to help them. Compassionate people display the following behaviors. They think about others, not just their own needs and interests. They are receptive to the demands of others and even anticipate them. They detect others' suffering and strives to understand and relieve it. They have good thoughts about others. They do not do to others what they would not want others to do to them. They treat others well without expecting a reward. They treat people well, even those who they don't have to. They are kind and helpful to the people with whom they interact. They can direct their attention to others. They do not just focus on themselves. They recognize their ability to help others. They maintain a balance between trust and prudence. Compassion can be developed through listening and empathy. You can start by making small gestures that benefit the people closest to you. For example, friends, neighbors, classmates. Later, this reflection can be extended to people who are further away.
Right. So as it was mentioned in the video, compassion is recognizing the distress, pain, and suffering that someone is experiencing and being willing to take action to help them through it. Or in other words, it is what drives our kindness to take action. It is a natural result from actually paying attention and listening to the person going through something. It is saying to someone going in distress or in a crisis, I can understand your pain and I want to help. Here are some examples of compassion. Motivating someone. For example, if your friend is feeling down because they failed a test or because they got into an argument with someone, it is okay to let them know that it's okay to feel sad or upset about the event and that you are there to help them get through it. That is an act of compassion. Doing a simple task such as opening the door for another person, whether their hands are full or they're not, is an act of compassion. Helping someone cross the street, giving up your seat on the bus to someone else, whether they have a visible disability or they don't. Sharing your umbrella with someone, donating clothes to a homeless shelter, or buying a meal for someone in need. Or in this case, when summer is coming up, buying someone a drink since it's getting really hot and it's important to stay hydrated in the hot weather. Can you think of any other examples of compassion? If you can think of them, you can write them down on page 2 of the manual. If you cannot think of any examples at the moment, that's okay. You can pause the video, take a few minutes and write them down. But one example that I have is helping someone carry things up the stairs, like groceries. Another example I have is being a source of support to someone challenging themselves. For instance, a friend who is trying something new, being a source of support and telling them, hey, I know you're nervous, but I think you're going to do great and I'll be here no matter what, is an act of compassion. We're going to challenge ourselves this week with the next activity. We are going to try and be compassionate every single day. The first activity is called Compassion Challenge, and it is on page 3 of the manual. And as we talked about, compassion is about being concerned about the feelings of other people when they are having a hard time. In this activity, we are going to write down 7 ways we're going to be compassionate to people this week. You're going to write them down in those little clouds. There are 7 of them. You can write 6 or 5, but we encourage you to write them all down so that you can really go ahead and challenge yourself this week to be compassionate. Something that I will do this week if I am going on the bus or if I'm going on the transit is I'm going to say thank you to the bus driver before getting off my stop. Why? Because this shows my gratitude for the job that they are doing. And they also feel like someone appreciates the work that they are doing in society. So take a few minutes, take all the time you need to think of some ways that you are going to be compassionate this week for 7 days. You can pause the video now to complete this activity. And then once you're finished, go ahead and hit play so that we can speak more about the other part of this webinar. Right, so now I want you to ask yourselves before we go into the next step, is compassion empathy? And the answer is no, it is not. Empathy, compassion and empathy are often used as interchangeable words, even though they mean different things. So I want us to use these words carefully. Compassion is more than just being concerned. However, I would like to note, empathy can stir compassion in us for other people. So then what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to imagine, sense, and feel the emotions as experienced by someone during the time of difficulty. And as maybe some of you have heard, empathy is being in someone else's shoes and being able to understand where they're coming from, their feelings at the time of the event, and saying, I know what it's like feeling that way too, and I'm glad you told me. Or saying, I understand what you're going through. I've been through a similar situation. If you know what empathy is, maybe it will be easier for you to do the next activity, because we're going to recognize what empathy is, and we're going to learn a little bit more with the next activity, which is on page 5 of the manual. You are first going to write down what empathy means to you. So based on what we just talked about, based on the definition that I just gave you, what does empathy mean to you? How do you define it in your own words? Then you're going to write down a time that you showed empathy, whether it was to a friend, to a family member, to a dog, it could be anything. A time that you show empathy, you're going to write it down. And then you're going to show why it was important for you to show empathy at the time, or why it is important to show empathy in general. What made you be empathetic towards this person? And then you're going to write down how it feels like when you show empathy or when someone shows empathy to you. Does it feel like you're being supported? Does it feel like you're not alone? What does it feel like? So take a few minutes to reflect on empathy and maybe the times you've shown empathy or you have been shown empathy. Pause the video, and then once you've completed the activity, go ahead and click play so that we can talk about self-compassion next. Right. So we discussed what compassion is, which is wanting to take action to alleviate someone's suffering or pain. And so self-compassion is doing something such as being positive or kind to yourself during challenging times, where we might doubt ourselves or be really harsh to ourselves. It is being kind to yourself during personal failures by honoring and accepting your humanness. This means understanding that mistakes and challenges are experienced by everyone and that it is okay to fail and make mistakes, as this allows us to learn and grow to be a better version of ourselves every single day. There are 3 pillars of self-compassion. Self-kindness, which is choosing to be supportive, caring, and encouraging towards ourselves. It is motivating yourself to try something new, such as joining a club or changing majors because you're no longer interested in the one you're in right now, or because you want to challenge yourself. Mindfulness, which is the practice of being aware and open to experiencing thoughts and emotions that are uncomfortable and unpleasant in a non-judgmental way towards ourselves. It is also understanding situations you are comfortable being in, such as staying in rather than going out because the week has been overwhelming and you're being mindful of yourself and your boundaries. And common humanity, which is recognizing that all human beings have human experiences, that mistakes, failures, moments of weaknesses are a normal part of everyone's life. As it was said before, is allowing yourself to be sad and upset because everybody makes mistakes and everybody fails. For example, failing a test, understanding that you studied what you could, that the test may have been more difficult than you thought, and that this happens to a lot of people. And understanding that there are other ways to make up for the failed test. Believe me, I used to think that test was like the end of the world, but it really, as you grow and you learn more about it, failing a test, it happens to everyone. And you will not fail a course, you will not fail school, you will not fail a life because it happens. And that just means you need more help or support. So it's okay. Here are more examples of the 3 pillars of self-compassion. Self-kindness. I forgive myself for not handling the situation well. I learned my lesson and I'll try to do better next time. Mindfulness. I can see that I'm being really hard on myself for not messing up and saying things I would never say to a friend. And common humanity. I am feeling depressed about my weight gain during the pandemic. I know that I'm not the only one struggling with this problem, but I know I can turn things around. If you can think of any other examples of self-compassion and the 3 pillars of self-compassion, you can write them down on page 6 of the manual. If you cannot, that's okay. The one I have is that rather than calling myself dumb whenever I fail a test or fail at anything, I'm going to try and say, hey, it's okay. You did your best and you can try next time. So we're going to do that with the next activity. We're going to change that talk. We're going to change the way we talk to ourselves whenever we have a self-critical thought. Because whatever we're saying to ourselves, we're listening. And so we're going to change that self-critical thought. We're going to make sure that whatever we're saying to ourselves whenever we criticize ourselves is positive, so that we gain more confidence, we gain more self-love, and that we are better to ourselves. So we are first going to describe a self-critical thought that we've had before or that maybe we have now. Something that I used to say to myself was, you're not smart at all. You're just lucky to be where you are. Then you're going to write down what you would say to a family member if they had this thought. Something that I would say is, I think you're pretty smart because every time I talk to you, I learned something new and you're incredible. Then you're going to write down what you would say to a friend who had this thought, whether they're close or you haven't talked to them in a while. Something that I would say is, don't say that to yourself. Don't be so harsh. You're so smart. And I am so proud of the person you've become. You're literally amazing. And then you're going to write down what you would say to yourself when you had this thought. Something that when you had this thought, what would you say to yourself? What was the first thing that came out to you in your head? Something that I say to myself often was, you need to work harder because everybody else here is smarter than you. And so you need to work harder to catch up. Then you're going to take a few moments to read what you wrote about what you would say to a family member, what you would say to a friend, and what you say to yourself. You're going to reflect and you're going to think about what differences you notice in those thoughts, in those words. Something that I notice is that I'm more harsh to myself and that I hurt myself because I know how to hurt myself with words and I know how to bring myself down. And lastly, we're going to practice self-compassion. From what we learned what self-compassion is, we're going to write down what I will say now, what you would say now to yourself, rather than being so harsh and hurtful to yourself. What are you going to say now to yourself? So something that I'm going to say to myself, which is true, is I'm pretty smart. Like, look at all the things that I've accomplished. I have graduated school. I have woken up today. I have been able to read so many books. It's okay to struggle sometimes. It doesn't mean I'm not smart. It just means I need more support, or that I need more help, or that I just need time to really understand what I'm talking about. So this can be a little bit hard to think about some self-critical thoughts and maybe like things that you would say to a friend, maybe things that you would say now. It's gonna take a bit of time, but that's okay. Take all the time you need. You can go ahead, pause the video now to finish this activity. And once you come back, Winnie's gonna go ahead and take it away and talk to you more about self-compassion.
Thank you, Camilla. And in the spirit of changing that talk, it segues us into the next part of our webinar. And we are going to start it with a video that encourages us to participate in an exercise in order for us to practice a little bit more self-compassion. In the video, the narrator talks a lot about muting the voices that are self-critical, the voices that are that entice us to self-blame, that entice us to nitpick the mistakes that we've made, but makes way for something new, makes way for us to leave all of these habits behind, but yielding ourselves the grace that we desire, that we need in order to lead a sustainable life. And we are going to play that video now. Enjoy.
To survive in this high-pressured, crazy world, most of us have to become highly adept at self-criticism. We learn how to tell ourselves off for our failures and for not working hard or smart enough. But so good are we at this that we're sometimes in danger of falling prey to an excessive version of self-criticism, what we might call self-flagellation, a rather dangerous state which just ushers in depression and underperformance. We might simply lose the will to get out of bed. For those moments, we need a corrective. We need to carve out time for an emotional state of which many of us are profoundly suspicious: self-compassion. We're suspicious because that sounds horribly close to self-pity. But because depression and self-hatred are serious enemies of a good life, we need to appreciate the role of self-care in a good, ambitious, and fruitful life. To this end, we can perform what we've called a self-compassion exercise, a structured meditation lasting 15 minutes or so. Lying in bed, or perhaps a bath, turn over a sequence of thoughts that interrupt and correct the flow of your worst self-accusations. For a time, adopt an entirely kindly perspective on your setbacks. The self-compassion exercise goes like this. We're so in love with success, we fail to notice the scale of the challenges we routinely set ourselves. There is nothing remotely normal about what we've tried to achieve. We've failed, but given the mountain we were trying to climb, the conclusion doesn't have to be that we're simply fools. We have tricky family histories, we all do. There were things which happened to us at the hands of others which can help to explain some of our current troubles. We're not entirely sane or well, but none of us are. We weren't well set up to carry out certain tasks. It isn't wholly our fault in the here and now. From the media, you'd think everyone was rich and famous and successful. But in reality, undramatic, quiet failure is by a huge margin the statistical norm. We shouldn't tear ourselves apart for not managing to beat what were, in truth, awesome odds. Tough, self-critical people don't allow themselves the indulgence of believing in luck. They take responsibility for everything. They think winners make their own luck. But they don't, for the most part. Luck is a genuine feature of existence. We're robbing ourselves of fair consolation by believing that we're entirely in control and therefore entirely to blame when we crash. You are not only your achievements. Status and material success are one bit of you, but there are others as well. Those who loved you in childhood knew this and in their best moments helped you to feel it. Rehearse the internalized voices of all those who've been kind to you. Bathe in the memory of a love independent of achievement. It seems it will never end. That's not the truth. It's just how a crisis feels. You need to reduce expectations to zero for a time. Take each new hour as it comes. And, without being banal, what you need most of all is some rest.
Raise your hand if you've personally been victimized by self-flagellation feelings. I think that, again, that video is just a great way to remind us that we are so much more than all of these external things. And the most important gift that we can give to ourselves is self-compassion. And what are the benefits of self-compassion? Why is it so important for us to practice self-compassion? Based on studies that have been done through the course of time, the increase of exercises of self-compassion, once we start doing that, what we see an increase in motivation and productivity. People who openly accept their failures and shortcomings are most likely to be motivated to improve themselves. And with an increase in motivation and productivity, we see a decrease in stress, depression, anxiety, anger, and trauma. Again, people who practice self compassion are more likely to experience positive mental health benefits and also an increase in resilience. Brene Brown talks a lot about shame and links shame and resilience in the sense of the resilience theory finds that overcoming feelings of shame begins with having self compassion. And what happens in the other side when we lack self compassion? Well, when we lack self compassion, we see an increase in mental health issues. We saw an increase in lack of motivation, and it's motivation for things that are that can be as mundane as can be, or things that we generally enjoy doing. All of a sudden, we lose the motivation to engage in these activities or to complete these tasks that were once motivated and motivating and enjoyable to us. And we also see an increase in negative self attitude, which leads to low self worth and emotional difficulties. So, that is difficulties expressing our emotions or emoting how we are feeling, labeling them, and finding different ways to manage these emotions. And where does a lack of self compassion come from? One does not simply become without self compassion. It comes from four different areas. And the first one is trauma. And what we've learned is that a history of serious trauma is one of the most common reasons for a lack of self compassion because trauma produces both emotional and mental scars. And these scars cause us to feel unlovable and unworthy of self kindness, self love, and self compassion. Learned patterns of denial is another way that is another area from which a lack of self compassion stems from. Self denial is sometimes a learned behavior that occurs from either directly experiencing neglect or indirectly observing others denying themselves of self love and care. And family values are also ways that we learn to not be compassionate with ourselves. Let's face it, because some families just don't nurture or value communicative habits around feelings. Some families, through family histories, we learn to just keep quiet about things that might not feel good to us. And that's taught us to just simply not be compassionate with ourselves. And last but not least, negative beliefs. Some people believe that self compassion leads to irresponsibility, complacency, and self indulgence. I don't know if you've ever heard people who say things like, I can't sit here feeling sorry for myself. It means that I'm weak. So these are people who are denying themselves self compassion because they believe that. And if you are someone who is compassionate towards yourself, you're simply self indulgent. And such negative beliefs hinder people from practicing self compassion overall. How can we show compassion to ourselves? There are different ways that we can show self compassion. And I'm sure some of these tactics or strategies are things that you're already incorporating into your life. But just like when we were putting this, when we were preparing ourselves for this webinar, there are a lot of exercises or strategies that we never have thought would have never thought would be acts of self-compassion, but we now are adding to our list of ways to show ourselves self-compassion daily and even weekly. Physically, how can we soften our body? We can soften our body through exercise, by sleeping, by massages, either giving ourselves massages or going out to get massages, a warm bath, and a cup of tea, the latter being especially enjoyable on the colder months. I know when it's warm, it's hard to think that winter is something of existence. But these are different ways that we can soften our bodies when we are having a hard day, a hard week, a hard month, or even a hard year. Mentally, what are some strategies that we can utilize to reduce agitation? We have meditation, we have watching a comedy, old or new, reading a book that can either be inspirational or that can be a thriller that ignites these different emotions in our bodies, drawing and unleashing um, our inner creativity, and doing a puzzle and exercising our cognitive or cognitive capacities. Emotionally, how can we soothe and comfort ourselves? We can do so by journaling. And through this journal, we can write daily gratitudes. And these are exercises that you can do when you do start your day, hoping to have a great day overall, or at the end of your day, especially if you had a tough day. It's great to look back on the day and pinpoint or label the greater parts of the day that maybe went into the back of your mind because we're so focused on what went negatively. Visualizing a peaceful image, listening to soothing music, great ways of comforting ourselves and taking deep breaths. I know personally, I often take deep breaths whenever I feel that situations are beyond my control and it's evoking different types of emotions that are not necessarily positive within my body. And what I often do is what I am inviting you to practice with me right now, putting your hands over your heart, feel your heart race, and then taking a deep breath in and then releasing, deep breath out. And you can gradually feel your heart beat slowing down as we are working at regulating our nervous system again. Relationally, how can we connect with others? We are now on the other side of COVID, where we were encouraged and urged to keep away from people who were a part of our immediate circles. But now we are called to reconnect with friends, of course, in you know, consciously COVID way, meeting up with friends, sending a thank you card. I know that whenever I get a thinking of you card, it warms my heart because it shows that the person who is our friend or who we care about is thinking of us. And what a great way to connect with others by telling them, by sending a thank you card or by reminding them of the friendship that you two share. Giving a compliment is a great way as well to relationally show compassion to ourselves by connecting with others, playing a board game, and finally joining a club, finding people who have a mutual interest in an activity and also an interest in getting better at this said task or activity, or simply discussing current events. Great ways of connecting with others. And spiritually, how do we commit or recommit to our values? Some people pray, some people practice yoga, others walk in nature. These are great ways, again, to start off your day or to end cap off your day as well. And going on a retreat. Again, if it's not something that's accessible to you, creating your own retreat in your living space. That can just be building a tent on a rainy day and just sort of going into an environment that looks a little bit different than what you are used to in your day to day. And finally, helping others. Some of us, we find our comfort in helping other people. So, committing to your values by helping others is a great way of showing compassion to ourselves. Fears versus tender self compassion. And the difference between the two is as follow. Fierce compassion is action oriented with noticeable changes, and tender self compassion is self acceptance, focusing on inner healing. And what are some action oriented um, uh, acts we can do is establishing boundaries. So saying no to things that we don't feel comfortable doing, or simply because we don't want to do them, and saying yes to things that we need, and doing what we need to do in order to change, grow, and learn as we continually evolve into a better version of ourselves. And tender self compassion, how can we focus on our inner healing through self acceptance? By positive self talk, positive affirmations, taking deep breaths, just like we did a few minutes ago. And it's important to establish a healthy balance between both. And what are some strategies that we can practice as we are moving towards more self-compassion? We talk to ourselves like we would talk to our friend. Camilla highlighted that a few slides earlier, how it is easier to be kind to our family members or to our friends than it is to be to ourselves. So in practicing self-compassion strategies, we can remember to retract and think about how would we talk to someone else going through a similar situation, and practicing that within ourselves and trying our very best to keep our thoughts positive and stop comparing ourselves to others. Easier said than done, I know. Um, but these are great ways to ensure that we are giving ourselves the compassion that we desire and that we need. Also, how what are some other ways that we can practice self-compassion? We can set small realistic goals. I know personally, whenever I do have a small goal for the day, it gets accomplished, I get a dose of contentment. And I think as well, a lot of times we focus on the larger goals that um, we're not able to accomplish, and we forget the smaller goals that we accomplish throughout the day, like cleaning out our space or cooking a meal for ourselves. These are great realistic goals that we can set, and once accomplished, show ourselves the compassion that we need. And once we do accomplish these goals, celebrating our small successes. A lot of times we are waiting for the external validations. We're waiting for other people to celebrate us, and we forget to celebrate ourselves. Take a minute today and celebrate the small wins from today, or the small wins from this week, or the small wins from this month, and you will notice how much you've accomplished despite all the odds that might stack up against you. Keeping a journal and daily positive affirmations. I am a big advocate for affirmations, because my love language is words of affirmation. So I often have to give myself the affirmation throughout my day and throughout my weeks. So some of the positive affirmations that you can incorporate into your strategies are saying, I am enough. I forgive myself. I am human like everyone else, and everyone else is a work in progress as well. I am letting go of the old and making room for the new. And friends, let me tell you, there is so much beauty in letting go of things that no longer serve us, or that no longer has the capacity to stay within our lives, and making room for beautiful new experiences and new things. So we will now move on to activity number 4. And activity number 4 can be found on page 9 of the manual that you have. And basically, we are going to do an exercise that revolves around self-love, acts of self-love. And in these 5 circles, what we're inviting you to do is reflect on, what do acts of self-love look like and feel like to you? So in these 5 circles, you will write these tasks. And an example that I've managed to come up with is, acts of self love look like when I communicate with myself in positive ways, and sort of like pushing out the negative thoughts and inviting the positive ways. And it feels good. It feels good to remind myself that I'm human and that I am enough, and that I've forgiven myself for the mistakes that I've made. Other ways that I show myself self love is setting boundaries and prioritizing my needs. It feels amazing to me, because it feels like I have a voice and I have control over my life and circumstances that revolve around my life. So take a few minutes and complete this exercise, and then you're welcome to pause this video to complete it. And then once you are done, you are welcome to return and press play so we can continue with our webinar. And another exercise, we have back-to-back exercise in this second part of our webinar. And exercise number 5, or activity number 5, is a self-care maintenance plan that can be found on page 11 of the manual that you have. And what we're doing is we are inviting you to craft a self-care maintenance plan. Why? Because self-care and self-compassion go hand in hand. It's a crucial part of self-compassion, caring for ourselves. So what we'd like for you to do in this exercise is, we'd like for you to consider what you do now for self-care, and you're going to write those what you're currently doing under current practices. And what we'd like for you to do is identify new strategies that you can begin to incorporate into your own maintenance plan as part of your ongoing t- um, goal of practicing more self-compassion. And what we're going to do, we're going to do these reflections on 4 different dimensions. So we have the mind. How do we care for ourselves mentally? What are our current practices, and what are some new practices that we'd like to incorporate? Emotionally, how we care for ourselves emotionally? What is your current practice, and what's going to be a new practice? How do you care for yourself physically? How do you care for your body? Current practice and new practice. And last but not least, the spirit. How do we care for our spirit? How do we care for ourselves spiritually? Current practice and new practice. And what we'd like for you to especially reflect on is, um, if you are focusing on one aspect more than the other, how can we focus on the other 3? Meaning, if you are moving your body through exercise, amazing, great. But how will you focus on your self care mentally, spiritually, and emotionally? Take a few minutes and complete this task. And if you're not able to come up with some ideas right at the top of your head, it's fine, because once you complete this exercise, we are going to give you a little bit more examples that you can incorporate into your self-compassion maintenance plan. So you are welcome to pause this video for now, and then you can return once you are finished. Just as previously mentioned, here are some ideas, some self-care ideas with compassion. Some of them will definitely sound familiar, and others, even if they don't sound familiar, you can perhaps incorporate them into your own maintenance plan that was previously completed. So some self-care ideas we have are having a great laugh, watching a comedy, or even reading a book that centers around comedy, getting some rest when our body needs rest, loving on an animal, especially on the times that we're feeling, a great deal of energy that's not necessarily positive. Petting on an animal is a great way of giving ourselves the self-care that we need. Planting a garden. It is now warm out. I notice a lot of people tending to their gardens, tending to uh, their flowers and their plants, and it's a great way of caring for your immediate community, and it's also a great way of giving yourself the self-care that you need. Reading a book, exercising and moving our body, listening to our favorite music or favorite podcast, playing a board game with a friend by connecting with someone else is a great way of showing ourselves self-care. And like we've mentioned before, celebrating the small wins throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month. Great way to practice that self-care. Journaling, writing things out, writing our feelings in our emotions, and feeling like we're not just keeping it all in, but we are sort of depositing it somewhere, or getting it out of our system in order for us to feel like we're getting it out there into the world. Sitting in nature, especially when it's so beautiful out. I know that especially in the month of June, the weather can be a little bit tricky, but on nice sunny days, going out into nature and sitting in nature is a great way of showing yourself self-compassion. Coloring. Who would have thought that what we used to do in kindergarten would come back full circle in our adult or early adult life, that would make us feel like we are caring for ourselves? I personally love coloring. And I think that's a task that if you partake in, you would find a lot of comfort in it, because now no one's judging us for coloring outside the line. That you are going to determine what is and is not acceptable to you. Striking a yoga pose, again, calmly moving our bodies, moving our joints, and feeling the changes within our bodies, and disconnecting from the internet. Mhm. Easier said than done. I know that that's a personal goal for myself, but that can just be reducing the amount of internet usage of your day from maybe 3 hours to now 2.5 hours, and celebrating that small win as well. Treating yourself and treating yourself to a walk, treating yourself to a shopping trip if it's accessible, or window shopping is also a great way of treating yourself, because that window shopping experience can become a small goal setting for yourself, saying, I may not have the money to purchase this today, but I'm going to be saving this amount or X amount of money per week. That way I can get this item that I really, really want for myself. Traveling and exploring new places. Again, not accessible to everybody, but in the event that it isn't, there are different parts of your neighborhoods that you could perhaps explore, and you could find something new or something enticing to you. And finally, staying hydrated. If you have a cup of water, I invite you to take a sip right now, and ensuring that you are giving your body the hydration that it needs in order for it to cope throughout the warmer months. So overall, self-care is meant to refuel us. It's any activity, anything that you can think of that takes care of our emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual needs. So I'd like to know, how will you care for yourself this week? I cannot wait to myself find different activities from this list to take care of myself this week. And I hope that you'll do the same as well. And there you have it. That is the end of our self-compassion webinar. I want to thank you. I'm borrowing Camilla's voice here to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, just for participating in this webinar with us, not simply listening to us, but following along on the slides, watching the videos with us, and partaking in the 5 activities that we had in the manual for you. And we hope that you took something from today. And what we especially hope is that you continue to yield yourself the grace that you need, the compassion that you need, caring for yourself in a way, the way that you need, and you deserve to be loved and cared for. And reminding you to take every day, day by day, day by day, and that you are so much more than the mistake that you made a few hours ago or a few days ago. You're so much more than that, and that you are human. That's what we have in common. We're human, and we're evolving into the better version of ourselves. So today we are reminding you to give yourself the love, the care, the compassion that you also deserve. So on that note, we will sign off. If you have any questions or want to have some additional information, you are more than welcome to visit us on our website and let us know at changingmindswithyouth.ca. It's written on the screen here. Again, it's changingmindswithyouth.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for being a part of our webinar, participating with us in our webinar today. We are signing off right now, and we wish you good self-compassion, good self-care, and take good care of yourself. Goodbye.
Bye.